Be me, Gregory, 34. I'm a systems administrator for a big, boring logistics company, the kind of place with gray carpets and coffee that tastes like disappointment. My job is to make sure the servers don't catch on fire, literally or figuratively. It's a world of logic, flowcharts, and binary outcomes. Things either work or they don't. I've always been that kind of guy, methodical, quiet. For a long time, I thought my life was on the right track. Good salary, stable career, a nice apartment downtown. And I had Luella. When we first met years ago, she was magnetic. She was finishing up her degree in sociology and was just full of fire. She talked about ideas I'd never even considered, about the hidden structures of society and the dynamics of power. It was fascinating. I was a guy who built computer networks. She was a woman who wanted to rebuild the world. It felt like we balanced each other out, my pragmatism and her passion. We got married a couple of years after she graduated. I was already climbing the ladder at my job, and my income was more than enough for both of us. The plan was for me to handle the bills while she built her platform. She wanted to be a voice, a thought leader. It started with a blog. She'd spend entire days writing these long, dense articles about corporate culture and its impact on modern life. I'd come home from work, my brain fried from troubleshooting a network outage, and she'd be vibrating with energy. She'd read me passages about the pervasive nature of systemic masculine pressure in the workplace. I didn't always get it, but I was proud of her. She was smart. She was driven. I was happy to be the guy who made sure the lights stayed on so she could do her important work. Her blog got some minor attention, a few hundred regular readers. Then she decided she needed to expand into a new medium. Podcasting. That's when things started to subtly shift. The first big purchase was the equipment. I came home one day to find our small second bedroom, which had been my office, completely transformed. Sound-dampening foam panels were stuck to the walls with adhesive tape. In the center of the room, on a brand new desk, sat a microphone that looked like it belonged in a professional recording studio. A whole mess of cables and an audio interface were connected to her laptop. I remember seeing the credit card statement a few weeks later. The total was nearly $4,000. When I asked about it, she explained that you couldn't skimp on quality. Her message was too important to be delivered with tinny, unprofessional audio. It was an investment in the brand. I let it go. It was a lot of money, but I got a bonus that year so we could cover it. The podcast launched. It was called Corporate Unwound, or something equally dramatic. She and a friend from her university days would talk for an hour every week. They discussed things like the psychological violence of the 9-to-5 workday, and toxic masculinity as a management strategy. I tried to listen to it a few times. I'd put my headphones on while doing the dishes, trying to understand her world. But it was hard. They used so much academic jargon, and sometimes it felt like they were talking about me. Not me by name, of course, but about men like me, men who worked in offices, who valued promotions, who didn't question the system. I once made the mistake of trying to offer a different perspective. She was talking about how corporate jobs crush the human spirit. I mentioned that my job, while stressful, gave me a sense of satisfaction, that I enjoyed solving complex problems. The look she gave me was cold. She told me I had been conditioned by the patriarchy to find fulfillment in my own subjugation. My satisfaction wasn't real. It was a symptom of a sickness. After that, I stopped trying to engage with her work. I just paid for it. The expenses kept growing. She needed a better laptop for audio editing. She needed a subscription to a premium hosting service for the podcast. She needed to attend a digital media summit in another state, which required flights, a hotel, and a pricey ticket. Every expense was justified with the same language. It was for her work. It was for the cause. Meanwhile, my life became a predictable loop. Wake up, go to work, fix things, come home, eat the dinner I usually cooked, watch some TV, go to sleep. Our conversations grew thinner. When I'd talk about my day, about a server migration or a security patch, her eyes would glaze over. But when she talked, I was expected to listen with rapt attention. She'd complain about the emotional labor of having to respond to comments on her blog. She'd talk about the exhausting work of conceptualizing a new podcast episode. One evening, she spent 20 minutes venting because the organic grocery store was out of the specific brand of kale she liked for her smoothies. She said it was a perfect example of late-stage capitalism's illusion of choice. I had just spent 12 hours dealing with a ransomware attack that had crippled our company's entire shipping department. I just nodded and said, "That sounds tough." I felt more like a sponsor than a husband, an ATM with a name. She never asked about my stress. She never asked about my worries. My role was simple: to provide a stable, comfortable platform from which she could critique the very systems that provided that stability and comfort. The irony was starting to become a heavy weight in my chest. The real turning point, the moment the floor fell out from under me, came about 6 months before the end. She came to me one evening, radiating an excitement I hadn't seen in years. She had a new grand idea. The blog and podcast were just the beginning. She was ready to monetize her brand. She wanted to launch a consultancy firm. Her target clients would be corporations looking to detoxify their work environments. She would offer workshops on ethical marketing, non-hierarchical management structures, and combating unconscious bias. It sounded ambitious, maybe even promising. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old pride. Then she told me what she needed from me. She needed $50,000 for seed capital. $50,000. That was a huge chunk of my personal savings. Money I had been carefully putting away for a down payment on a house. My voice was quiet when I asked her if she had a business plan. She scoffed. She said business plans were archaic patriarchal documents that stifle organic growth. I pressed a little. I asked if she had any potential clients lined up, or market research, or even just a simple spreadsheet with projected costs. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was trying to be responsible. This was my world. You don't make a $50,000 decision without a plan. That's when she turned on me. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a low, venomous tone. She said she couldn't believe, after all these years, that I would be so unsupportive, that I was actively trying to sabotage her. She accused me of being threatened by her potential. She said I was a hypocrite, pretending to support her while secretly wanting her to stay small, to stay dependent on me. She said my request for a business plan was just a way for me to exert control, to use my financial power to keep her in her place. Every word was a perfectly crafted ideological dagger. I was speechless. I just sat there as she dismantled our entire marriage in the space of 5 minutes. She ended her tirade with a chillingly calm statement. She told me she could no longer thrive in such a toxic and unsupportive environment. She was leaving me. She said she was filing for divorce. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration, an invoice for my failure to comply. The weeks that followed were a blur of cold silence and awkward maneuvering around the apartment. She acted with a kind of righteous martyrdom, as if she were a political prisoner finally escaping her captor. I just felt numb, confused. Then the papers arrived, a thick envelope delivered by a courier. I sat at the kitchen table and read through the legal documents. It was real. A friend from work, a guy who had been through a nasty divorce himself, gave me a number for a lawyer. He said, "Don't talk to her, don't agree to anything, just call this guy, now." So I did. The lawyer's name was Ivan. His office was in an old downtown building, filled with dark wood furniture and shelves overflowing with thick leather-bound books. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, with tired eyes that had seen everything. He didn't offer any comforting platitudes. He just gestured to a chair and told me to start from the beginning. So I told him everything. The blog, the podcast, the equipment, the conferences, the constant expenses. I told him about her ideas, her language, her complete financial dependence on me. I told him about the consultancy firm and the $50,000 demand that broke the camel's back. I probably sounded like a rambling, heartbroken fool. When I finished, Ivan leaned back in his creaky leather chair and steepled his fingers. He was quiet for a long time, just looking at me. Finally, he let out a slow, weary sigh. He said, "All right, so your wife has mistaken you for a nonprofit foundation, and now that the grant money has been cut off, she's suing the foundation for failing to fulfill its mission." It was the most succinct and accurate summary I could have imagined. He told me not to worry. He told me that family court, despite the horror stories, was ultimately a place of numbers and facts. He said, "Ideology doesn't pay the bills. Let's see what the numbers say." The first step was discovery. Her lawyer sent over a list of financial demands. It was staggering. She wanted the apartment. She wanted the car, which was fully paid off, and she wanted alimony, but the document had a specific strange phrase. It said she was requesting empowerment alimony. I asked Ivan what that meant. I'd never heard of it. He read the paragraph and let out a short, dry laugh. He explained that her legal team was trying to frame the request in ideological terms. They weren't arguing that she was unable to work or that she needed support to get back on her feet. They were arguing that she was entitled to my income as a form of reparations. Reparations for the years she spent performing unpaid emotional and intellectual labor that contributed to my success and peace of mind. The money wasn't for survival. It was to fund her journey of self-actualization and allow her to continue her important work without the distraction of material concerns. She wanted 50% of my post-tax income, indefinitely. I felt sick to my stomach. It was the consultancy pitch all over again, but this time, it had the force of the law behind it. Ivan was unfazed. He just said, "Good. Let them argue that in front of a judge. Now, let's get our homework done." For the next few weeks, my life was a mountain of paperwork. Ivan had me gather every financial document from the last 5 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, pay stubs, tax returns. We went through them line by line. We created a massive spreadsheet. One column was my income, the other was hers. Her column was mostly empty, save for a few tiny deposits from blog advertisements and podcast sponsorships. The grand total of her earnings over 5 years was less than $1,000. Then we made another spreadsheet, a detailed breakdown of all household and personal expenses. We categorized everything: rent, utilities, groceries, car payments, insurance. And then a special category: Luella's professional expenses, the audio equipment, the laptop, the flights, the conference tickets, the website hosting fees, the online courses she took on brand building. As I compiled the list, the numbers painted a stark, undeniable picture. It wasn't a partnership, it was a sponsorship. And I was the sole sponsor. The most damning evidence, however, wasn't in the bank statements. Ivan had an idea. He asked me if her podcast was still online. It was. She had even released a new episode after she left, titled "Breaking Free: My Journey Beyond Patriarchal Constraints." Ivan hired a paralegal to transcribe every single episode, and he had me go through her blog and social media with a fine-tooth comb. We were looking for specific things: any mention of her lifestyle, any posts about travel or expensive purchases, and any statements she made about her finances or her relationship with work and money. What we found was a gold mine. There were posts from her research trip to a fancy resort, where she talked about decolonizing wellness. My credit card paid for that trip. There were photos of her at expensive restaurants with captions about the importance of communal joy. I paid for those meals. But the real bombshell came from one of her old podcast episodes. It was from about a year ago. She and her co-host were laughing about the hypocrisy of fighting against capitalism while living within it. And then Luella said it. I remember the feeling of cold dread as I listened to the recording. Her voice so familiar, so cheerful, saying, "You just have to be strategic. You have to learn to leverage the resources at your disposal. My husband, bless his heart, he's a very logical, systems-oriented man. He doesn't really get what I do, but he sees it makes me happy. He's my patron, my own personal arts grant, and I'm happy to let him be." She called me a resource, an arts grant. Ivan just nodded slowly when I played it for him. He saved the audio file and labeled it Exhibit A. He looked at me and said, "The truth is often much simpler than the stories people tell themselves." The court date was set for a Tuesday morning in late spring. I barely slept the night before. I kept imagining the worst-case scenario, a judge who bought into her narrative, who saw me as the bad guy, who would saddle me with crippling payments for the rest of my life. All the horror stories my divorced friend had told me were echoing in my head. I walked into the courthouse, feeling like I was walking to my own execution. Luella was already there, sitting with her lawyer, a young, eager-looking woman who radiated righteous indignation. Luella looked serene, confident. She gave me a small, pitying smile, as if I were a child who just didn't understand what was best for him. That look, more than anything else, solidified my resolve. This wasn't about love or loss anymore. This was about the simple, binary truth, what was real and what was a performance. And I had the receipts to prove it. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, colder too. It had the same sterile, impersonal feel as a government office. The judge walked in and everyone stood up. She was an older woman, maybe in her late 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She didn't smile. She just sat down, opened a file, and got straight to business. Luella's lawyer went first. She stood up and began a speech that was clearly well rehearsed. It sounded less like a legal argument and more like the introduction to one of Luella's podcast episodes. She spoke of the invisible architecture of marital labor and the unquantifiable but essential contribution Luella had made to our household. She painted a picture of Luella as a brilliant thinker, a visionary whose potential had been systemically constrained by the practical realities of a patriarchal society. My income, she argued, wasn't just mine. It was a product of a collaborative domestic enterprise. My ability to focus at work and climb the corporate ladder was only possible because Luella was at home, providing the stable emotional and intellectual bedrock upon which my success was built. It was an impressive performance. The lawyer used all the right words like equity, validation, and structural imbalance. Then she got to the core of their demand. She stated that traditional alimony was an outdated concept, rooted in the idea of female dependency. What they were proposing was something more progressive. Empowerment alimony. This wasn't about need, it was about justice. It was a way for the court to formally recognize Luella's non-economic contributions. The financial support would allow her to finally launch her consultancy, to become fully self-actualized and financially independent, a goal she claimed I had passively but effectively sabotaged. She concluded by saying this was an opportunity for the court to make a landmark decision, to align the law with a more modern understanding of partnership. Through it all, the judge just listened. Her expression never changed. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching quietly in the silent room. When the lawyer finished and sat down, Luella gave her a subtle, approving nod. She looked confident, as if they had just won. The judge looked over at our table. "Mr. Ivan," she said, her voice flat. "Your response?" Ivan stood up slowly. He was holding a single thick binder. He didn't walk to the lectern. He just stood by our table. He said, "Your Honor, my client's position is much simpler. It's not based on sociology, but on arithmetic." He opened the binder. "For the past 5 years," he began, his voice calm and methodical, "my client Gregory has been the sole financial provider for this household. Not the primary provider, the sole provider." He laid out the first document. It was a summary of our joint tax returns. He pointed to the lines showing my income, then to the lines showing Luella's. The disparity was stark. It wasn't a gap, it was a canyon. Next, he moved on to the bank statements. He didn't just show the totals. He had highlighted specific recurring expenses. He said, "We are not here to dispute that my client paid for the couple's rent, utilities, and groceries." He did. What is relevant, however, is that he also paid for 100% of his wife's personal and professional endeavors. He started listing them, his voice a dry monotone. On this date, a charge for $3,150 for professional-grade audio equipment. On this date, a charge for $2,200 for a new laptop. On this date, a series of charges totaling over $7,800 for airfare and registration for a media conference. He went on like this for several minutes. With each item he listed, I could see Luella shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Her serene confidence was beginning to crack. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the details were irrelevant. The judge just waved her off. "He's establishing a financial baseline, counsel. Let him continue." Ivan then turned to the concept of Luella's work. He said, "The opposing counsel has eloquently described Luella's contributions as intellectual labor. Let's examine the financial fruits of that labor." He presented a spreadsheet, a summary of all income deposited into our accounts from her blog and podcast. The 5-year grand total was displayed at the bottom in bold, $841.27. $841, Ivan repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Over 5 years, against expenditures for this same work that my client funded to the tune of over $15,000. He paused. "From a purely business perspective, Your Honor, This was not a collaborative enterprise. It was a passion project. A very expensive hobby that my client, out of love and support for his wife, was willing to underwrite. Luella's face was now pale. She was staring daggers at Ivan, but Ivan wasn't finished. He was just getting to the main event. He said, "The central argument for this empowerment alimony is that my client somehow held his wife back, that he prevented her from achieving her potential. The evidence, Your Honor, suggests the exact opposite." He then brought up her social media. He had prepared poster-sized printouts of several of her posts. The first one was a picture of her sitting by a beautiful infinity pool, a laptop open in front of her. The caption was a long paragraph about the importance of escaping the grind to find creative clarity. Ivan calmly read the caption aloud, then stated, "This photo was taken at a 5-star resort in Arizona. The trip, which lasted a week, was paid for in its entirety by my client. It was, in fact, his Christmas bonus that funded it." He put up another photo. Luella at a fancy dinner with several friends, raising a glass of wine. The caption was about the revolutionary power of female community. Ivan said, "This restaurant has a prix-fixe menu of over $200 per person. My client's credit card paid for his wife and 3 of her friends that evening." Luella's lawyer shot to her feet. "Objection. This is character assassination. It has no bearing on the case." The judge looked at Ivan. "Counsel, where are you going with this?" Ivan replied calmly, "I am demonstrating a pattern, Your Honor. The narrative being presented is one of struggle and suppression. The documented reality is one of leisure and unrestricted spending, all funded by the man she now accuses of holding her back." The judge considered this for a moment. "I'll allow it, but get to your point." Ivan nodded. "My final point, Your Honor." He walked over to the court's AV system and placed a small audio player on the lectern. He said, "I would now like to play a short audio clip for the court. It is from an episode of Luella's podcast, which aired approximately 1 year ago, her own words, in her own voice." He pressed play. The sound of Luella's cheerful, confident voice filled the quiet courtroom. First, the sound of her laughing. Then, the words, crystal clear. "You just have to be strategic. You have to learn to leverage the resources at your disposal. My husband, bless his heart, he's a very logical, systems-oriented man. He doesn't really get what I do, but he sees it makes me happy. He's my patron, my own personal arts grant, and I'm happy to let him be." Ivan stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. I didn't dare look at Luella, but I could feel the heat of her humiliation from across the room. Ivan walked back to our table. He looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, a person who is being suppressed does not refer to their partner as a resource to be leveraged. An artist who is being held back does not call their husband an arts grant." These are the words of a person who has enjoyed, for many years, a life of complete financial freedom with no responsibilities, funded entirely by the labor of another. He continued, "This request for empowerment alimony is a fiction. It is a cynical attempt to rebrand a life of dependency as a political statement. My client supported his wife's dreams. He paid for everything. His only crime, it seems, was to finally say no when the demands became unsustainable. He is not a patriarch. He is not an oppressor. He is a working man who has been taken for a very long, very expensive ride. We ask that the court deny the request for alimony in its entirety." Ivan sat down. He didn't look at me. He just neatly stacked his papers. The judge looked at Luella's lawyer. "Counsel," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have a response to that audio recording?" The young lawyer stood up, but she seemed to have shrunk. She stammered, "My client." Her words were taken out of context. It was a light-hearted conversation. The judge held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it," she said sharply. She then turned her gaze directly on Luella. It was the first time she had addressed her directly. "Ma'am," the judge said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "I have been on this bench for 15 years. I have heard every sad story imaginable. I have seen real hardship. I have seen women who sacrificed their careers, their education, their entire adult lives to raise children and support a family, only to be left with nothing." She leaned forward slightly. "You are not one of them." Her voice grew harder. You are an educated, able-bodied woman with no children and no impediments to employment. Your husband funded your lifestyle and your hobbies for years. Based on the evidence presented today, the only thing holding you back from financial independence is your own unwillingness to seek it. She picked up her pen. The notion that you are entitled to his future earnings as a form of reparation is not just baseless, it is offensive. It is an insult to every person who comes into this courtroom with a genuine need for support. She looked down at the file in front of her. The request for alimony is denied in full. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I wanted to cry, but the judge wasn't done. She looked at Luella's lawyer. Furthermore, I find that this entire petition was brought forth on frivolous grounds, seemingly as a tactic to punish your ex-husband for refusing to finance a speculative business venture. The court does not appreciate its time being wasted on what amounts to a theatrical performance. She made a final note on her pad. I am ordering your client, Luella, to pay for Mr. Gregory's legal fees in the amount of $10,000. Payment to be made within 90 days. We are adjourned. She banged the gavel. Once. The sound echoed in the silent room. It was over. Luella just sat there, frozen. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her mouth slightly open. The serene, enlightened thought leader was gone. In her place was just a woman who had gambled and lost spectacularly. I stood up, my legs feeling a little shaky. Ivan gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "Let's go," he said quietly. We walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The aftermath was quiet, but swift. Luella tried to spin the narrative online, of course. She wrote a long, rambling blog post about the inherent misogyny of the family court system and how the judge was a tool of the patriarchy. But the story, the real story, somehow got out. Maybe from someone who was in the courtroom that day. The comments on her post were brutal. People called her a grifter, a hypocrite, a fraud. Her community turned on her in an instant. The audio clip of her calling me her arts grant became a meme in some corners of the internet. Her podcast went silent. Her blog was eventually taken down. The last I heard, from a mutual acquaintance, was that she had to move back in with her parents, and she'd gotten a job, working as a cashier at a high-end organic supermarket. The irony was almost too perfect. As for me, the first few months were strange. The quiet in the apartment felt enormous. But it wasn't a lonely quiet. It was a peaceful quiet. I took the money I'd saved for the house and used some of it to buy myself something I'd wanted since I was a teenager, a beat-up old project motorcycle. I spent my evenings and weekends in the garage, cleaning engine parts, wrestling with rusty bolts, and slowly, piece by piece, bringing it back to life. My hands were covered in grease, my muscles ached, but my mind was clear for the first time in years. I wasn't thinking about emotional labor or systemic oppression. I was thinking about torque specs and wiring diagrams. It was real. It was tangible. It was a problem I could solve with logic and hard work. It's been over a year now. The bike is running. I take it out on country roads on sunny weekends. I'm not bitter. I'm not even angry anymore. I just feel free. I learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the people who talk the most about empowerment are the ones who are most afraid of standing on their own 2 feet. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll meet someone else someday. Maybe I won't. But I know one thing for sure. I'm not an arts grant. I'm the guy who builds the damn thing himself. And that's more than enough.